writing about Pritchett, Green, Roald Dahl, whatever, as a writer of non-fiction, you need to weigh out the balance. At the moment, what we've had is a campaign against the Royal Society of Literature based on rumour and gossip. There has been no actual evidence. We as trustees and I as chair of council are meeting today, and I'll be presenting them the full weight of the evidence. And I've seen everything, and I can't see any evidence of censorship at all. I think that maybe it's about election year, but it's partly about editing. You know, sometimes language becomes so emotive. What is editing is gets conflated as censorship. There may have been a suggestion of changing a word or two. But I think what this is really about is that, and I've been chair now in my 4th year, and my director, Molly Rosenberg, we've been actually subject to a campaign of harassment by a very small group of fellows, to the point where anything we do is inflamed into a level of debate.
Okay.
Debate, and it won't be worse.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just make the point?
Yeah.
Because really what this is about is diversity. What we've been trying to do, my time in 3 years, is to diversify literature. And I've been under attack for diversifying. You know, we have 10 literary prizes now. We have a more rigorous fellowship programme than ever before in its 203-year history. We have loads of literary events each year. We have an outreach programme where we take authors to prisons and schools. This is the face of diversity. I had an author a couple of weeks ago email me saying that diversity happens naturally. You are putting the cart before the horse. And I have to say to all fellows, diversity does not happen naturally. The face of diversity has to be fought for, and it has to be taken on board by everyone. So I encourage all fellows to side with us instead of joining this sort of bandwagon where there's negative stuff said about it.
But I think the charge against you on the diversity and the changing of the fellowship point is not against the bid to broaden that group of people who are privileged enough to be elected to the fellowship, but to say do so in a way that makes sure you're still taking from a pool of people who have published enough, who have reached a certain point in their careers.
Sure. So if I can just answer that by saying, at one point you didn't even have to have written a book to be a fellow. Now you have to publish 2 books. We've got a specialist committee. It's actually harder now than ever before in 203-year history to become a fellow. And yet, no surprise, certain fellows are unhappy with this. I've had some rude, sarcastic emails about the fact that we're emancipating literature. We're going to, select authors. We're going to make our processes transparent and fair.
Okay, so then let's come to the specific issue then surrounding what is or was in the most recent issue of your annual magazine review, which I think people were expecting to see at the end of last year. Is there an article critical of Israel in it, and will there be when it is published?
Yeah, there is an article critical of Israel in a paragraph by one of the authors, and of course we're going to publish that in full. There was never a debate about publishing that article.
Was it delayed then?
Yeah, it is delayed because we had a series of issues with the review. We had 2 days to edit it. We have to go back to authors to edit and change things. We're changing the style of it, the look of it. So I think authors have found something to attack us for. Oh, we'll take this article and start attacking RSL for that. In a sense, this conversation is a non-story, because we're going to publish that article and we're going to publish loads of other articles celebrating literature and authors' right to speak freely.
Daljit Nagra, Chair of the Royal Society of Literature, thank you.
It's coming up to 12 minutes to 9 now. Visitors are to be welcomed back to the Farne Islands to see the glorious puffins, the terns, the kittiwakes. For the past 2 years, bird flu has forced the National Trust to keep the islands closed. We can talk to the countryside manager now, Ian Clevitt, who's speaking to us from Belford in Northumberland. Morning to you. This must be an exciting moment for you.
It is indeed, yes. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, tremendous. We're delighted to open the door, so to speak, back onto the islands after, as you say, 2 years of being closed just as a precautionary measure.
Precautionary because people could spread the disease?
No, not at all. No, the evidence is that people are not a part of that, although one of the things we have been learning over the past couple of years is just exactly how the disease is spread, and the most recent information about that is that it's the birds themselves It's through their guano, particularly. That's the particular issue.
So why did you use the word precautionary? I imagine it would have been upsetting for visitors to go and see lots and lots of dead birds. But that's not the same as precautionary.
Yeah, no, indeed. No, we wanted to make sure that the conditions were right for people to go. As you say, the very, very last thing we wanted was people to go on those islands to see dead and dying birds. That would be obviously not what we wanted to share with folks, and that's not what the place is about. We want to encourage people to come see the place and enjoy the wildlife.
So, is the problem of bird flu over, or is it just that it's reduced to an extent that it is now possible to get visitors onto that island to celebrate birds that are alive and thriving?
Yeah, it's dangerous to say it's over. I'd love to say that, and I can touch wood to kind of hope for that. What we have seen is over the past couple of years, the number of instances has gone down. Now, we have to note, of course, that is only 2 years. So it's reduced by 39%. So in 2022, there were over 6,000 carcasses picked up. Last year, there was just over 3,500. So we've seen a reduction in that. Obviously, we can't draw definite straight lines at the moment. We need at least another season's data to see how things are going. But on the basis of that reduction, and there's an acknowledgement that in the world at present, there is very little HPAI, the highly pathogenic avian influenza out there. So we're looking to that and working around that subject.
Lovely. Well, it'd be nice to reunite people with the birds they want to see, not least the penguins. Ian Clement, thank you for joining us.
The time is now 10 to 9. It is World Gaelic Week. It's an idea that came about 3 years ago as a way to have a moment in the year where the Scots language is celebrated, not only here in Scotland, but by lovers of the language elsewhere in the world. It was actually the idea of one of our colleagues, who we will hear from in just a moment. Here's a little of the BBC's programme celebrating 100 years of Gaelic broadcasting last year.
Yn Gaelic y dod pianoch yn planúr yn hwlfwr siarabas eipodach go BBC mae'n cytiog tríte cyrichet. A dwi'n wochrech gwel lechit bliono o fami y sas yn y brogram y cwrwch lechit blione hiad lechit blione. Begael Neil Bachgillehain I faos cion I rod crwyl I BBC yn Napoleon as yr andan o fa gan y dwlwch neu cytiog ffigit y tri chai Gaelic chrysgylig ar y radio as yn y hiad yw'r.
There we go. You get the idea. Joy Dunlop is the founder of World Gaelic Week. She works on BBC Scotland and BBC Alba as a weather presenter, forecasting in both languages then, I imagine, Joy?
Yes, I do.
So what do we hear in that clip?
Well, it's the wonderful broadcaster Cynnych Machiever. He created a programme that celebrated 100 years of Gaelic broadcasting from pulling lots of different clips from around the year. He was basically just setting the scene of how hard it is to imagine that the programme he worked on 50 years ago to celebrate 50 years of Gaelic broadcasting has now come around to the 100 years celebration.
Yeah. And tell me, did you grow up yourself as a Gaelic speaker?
No, I didn't actually. So I'm from Argyll, which is an area steeped in Gaelic heritage, but my parents don't speak Gaelic. So probably like a lot of people my age, I grew up singing in Gaelic, I grew up playing traditional music, and then I learned Gaelic as a second language in secondary school before doing a full immersion degree. So I came from it in a bit more of a slightly different route to maybe some who are lucky enough to speak it from birth.
And the fact that there is now a World Gaelic Week and there are events taking place, I mean, all over the world, I think, Australia, Canada, is this the Scottish diaspora, or are these people who have nothing to do with Scotland but are turning to the language purely out of interest?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I mean, we definitely have a wonderfully strong diaspora community. People remember their roots and they feel very Scottish throughout wherever they are throughout the world, and they're very passionate about that. But also, we have a really thriving online community of learners that are, I guess, particularly from around lockdown, it was the one silver lining of lockdown that actually people had a bit more time to learn languages, and we saw that Gaelic in particular had a huge resurgence through free learning tools like Duolingo, the Speak Gaelic course, and I think actually you're really seeing now how people are bringing the language into their lives, and that geographical barrier that perhaps might have been there beforehand isn't now. So our language, our culture is being celebrated throughout the globe, and I just think that's a wonderful thing.
Is the initial barrier quite high for an English speaker, because the sounds of the syllables and the words seem so different?
I think it's interesting because in practically any other country in the world, speaking more than one language is very normal. So I think that's actually the biggest barrier, that we're just not used to learning in the same way. If you're Scottish, a lot of the sounds are in. There's the h, the y's, the y's. We've got that anyway. That's in our Scottish speech. But actually, I think the difference is it's not a Romance language. So when you come to it speaking English, you maybe expect it to have the same sentence structure, you maybe expect it to have the same grammar. It doesn't. But actually, I think Gaelic is a much easier language to learn than English. I take my hat off to anybody who manages to learn English, because actually it's a lot more regular when you start to learn the sounds and the spellings. Whereas Gaelic is very regular, it follows a pattern, and it's just so beautiful to listen to. It has that mellifluous sound to it. There's a sing-songiness, the rise and fall. I think if you can crack into that, it's just such a beautiful language. It's really tied to the community and the heritage.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Joy Donald. How do I say thank you to you in Gaelic?
You say, Tach believe.
Tach believe. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
I'm glad you didn't ask me to do that. Not too good at pronunciations. Which raises an interesting question, Michelle. Do men's and women's brains operate differently? I ask you as the mother of 3 boys before we turn to someone who's a professor and knows the answer.
Let's turn to the expert, yeah. No, let's turn to the expert first.
Yes, mull on that thought. But the reason we ask the question is because scientists at Stanford University think they may have found evidence for men's and women's brains operating differently. Using AI, they've analysed brain scans which detect differences between the sexes based on activity in hotspot areas in the brain. Well, Barbara Sahakin, Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology at the University of Cambridge, joins us. Professor, what do you make of what you've seen of this study?
Well, it's a very impressive study, and Professor Vinod Menon's group is well known. So it does look really fascinating that they were able to detect at greater than 90% whether the brains were female or male. So I think it's a very exciting way forward. We have known for some time that there are these differences that the way women and men approach things, and cognitively there are some differences. So men are very good at visual spatial things and so forth, and women are much good at the sort of social cognitive skills. So we do know that there are these differences, but we did a study some time ago which we published in Cerebral Cortex, where we actually looked at structure, and there we found that about 25%, using machine learning techniques, 25% of brains were assigned to the male end, 25% to the female end, and 50% we called androgynous. They were in the middle ground, and that was using the large sample from the UK Biobank. So it is interesting that different results come out, but they have.
Does your study, or does this study, answer the question whether it's nature or nurture? In other words, is it the way boys and girls are brought up that reshapes their brain, or is it natural to their brains?
Well, certainly there's an interaction between the genetics and the environmental influences, and you can change, obviously, the way you develop a brain through the way you expose people to different experiences. And there has been this psychological androgyny, which is good for your mental health, to be able to be cognitively flexible and change the way you behave depending on the circumstances. And that's why sort of getting women into STEM areas and things like that is so important, so that you don't channel them in one direction or the other, but you give them opportunities that they might not otherwise have.
This is so interesting, Barbara, because it made me wonder, and I don't know if this kind of data is available, but society has such different expectations of men largely today compared to a generation or two ago. Being in touch with your emotions, the expectations and the understanding of parenting. I wonder if you think that You know, if we had the data to look at brain scans of men from 30 years ago, whether we would see a difference compared to today?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Michelle. I think that probably because we do have environment influences the way our brains develop, it might well be. I mean, certainly we do know that a preponderance of women tend to get depressed, and I think with Professor Menon's data, you know, part of this suggests it's related to the default mode network and the fact that you're maybe more introspective about yourself and reflect too much inwardly and not going more outwardly. But we also know that you know, more males are getting depressed these days. So the environment does affect the way the brain reacts and develops.
I'm going to go and get more in touch with my feelings, Michelle.
Always a good thing. And that's it from us, our editors Joshua Tyndall, Jade Bogart, Preleur, Sophie Calvert and Katie Hasseldine with me here in Edinburgh. The studio director was Shona O'Donoghue in London. Coming up, John Ronson.
BBC News at 9 o'clock. A draft UN Security Council motion proposed by the United States is calling for a temporary ceasefire in Gaza as soon as is practicable. The text also opposes an Israeli offensive in the southern city of Rafah, where about 1 million Palestinians are sheltering from the fighting. Israel believes Hamas fighters are hiding among civilians there. BBC analysis of official documents has found that David Cameron's government knew that the Post Office stopped a secret investigation that may have helped sub-postmasters prove their innocence. The probe, that was ordered in February 2016, was looking into how often branch accounts have been adjusted remotely. The investigation was stopped when sub-postmasters began legal action. The Post Office says it's for the public inquiry to reach conclusions on what happened. The Labour chair of the Commons Business and Trade Committee, Liam Byrne, told Today the disclosure raises questions.
It reveals first that there was a pattern of behaviour at the Post Office, basically cancelling investigations that might produce a truth which undermines their case in law. But crucially, what the story reveals is that ministers were cited on this.
The High Court in London is due to hear what is expected to be Julian Assange's final appeal against the ruling to extradite him to the United States. The WikiLeaks founder is wanted by the US over an alleged conspiracy to obtain and disclose hundreds of thousands of leaked documents relating to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Barclays has announced a pre-tax profit of £6.6 billion for 2023. The figure is 6% lower than the previous year. Barclays said it spent £900 million over the final 3 months of 2023 on restructuring. The Prime Minister is due to address the National Farmers Union conference in Birmingham this morning. He's expected to say that he'll never take the country's food security for granted. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. We'll have more personal reflections on the miners' strike 40 years on in half an hour. Today we're meeting Anne Jones. Her husband John was on strike for the full year, and during that time she herself became an organiser, a public speaker and a regular on the picket lines, along with many other women. Anne Jones will be reflecting on that time in her life at 9:30 here on Radio 4, and you can hear more personal stories by searching for the miners' strike return journey on BBC Sounds. Now though, John Ronson's tales from the front lines of the culture wars take us to a town hall in Chipping Norton.
The story starts with 4 people who shouldn't have anything in common, besides them all being accomplished in their very different fields, and them all wanting to play a part in a more sustainable future. And in fact, they have something quite startling in common. There's Duncan.
My name is Duncan Enright. I'm a counsellor in Oxfordshire.
There's James.
I'm James Stallworth. I'm the co-founder of Brownstone Shared Housing.
There's Ida.
My name is Ida Auken. I am a member of the Danish Parliament.
And there's Joseph.
I'm Joseph Yoon from Brooklyn Bogs, and I'm an Edible Insight Ambassador.
Until recently, Duncan was responsible for improving Oxford's traffic flow strategy.
All the places I can think of that have had real problems with transport have been those with old infrastructure but modern levels of traffic. And one of the things that limits people's opportunities is being able to travel. So I was determined to do something about that.
Duncan's solution was to find ways to make bus travel more inviting.
That meant bringing forward an idea of some filters around the city of Oxford in order to make sure that the buses got through quick, but also it becomes very attractive compared to cars.
Over in San Francisco, James from Brownstone Shared Housing had his own problem to solve, because after he and his partner had graduated college,
We're couch surfing and doing anything just to be able to live near where we need to be. Of course, the rent is too high, but building in California or New York is very difficult and takes years, so it's kind of a pipe dream is the way that we saw it.
hence their idea.
We created what we called sleeping pods. It resembles more the capsule hotels you see in Japan.
Over in Brooklyn, Joseph was considering how he, as a chef, could help combat world hunger and global warming, and his solution.
I learned that there are over 2 billion people already consuming edible insects. What if we were to incorporate edible insects just once a week? Similar to Meatless Mondays, we could have like Buggy Tuesdays.
And so Joseph became an edible insect chef, often cooking for up to 1,000 curious people at a time.
If we're talking about lunch, maybe I'll make cream of mushroom soup and utilize cricket stock as the base.
And then there was Ida from the Danish Parliament. At just 33, Ida had become Denmark's Minister for the Environment. She regularly attends high-level invite-only meetings like the World Economic Forum's Davos conference, where, she says, she tries to engage attendees like the heads of BP and Chevron into becoming more environmentally aware, mostly to no avail.
The biggest problem for World Economic Forum is there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of convening, but it's not always turned into action.
Still, she perseveres. And in 2016, the World Economic Forum invited Ida to write an essay for their website.
It was a task that I was assigned from World Economic Forum to imagine a city in the year 2030. And I thought, why not take a trend that I saw was spreading, namely that products were being turned into services, like people renting out their homes via Airbnb or using Uber instead of owning their own cars.
And so Ida wrote her essay, imagining a future time when we would own nothing, not even a right to privacy.
This was a thought experiment. I even remember that I had sort of an extra line writing, this is not my vision or my utopia, it is a thought experiment trying to see some of the pros and cons of the sharing economy.
Ida's 2016 essay was received very well. It got translated into something like 12 languages. She was happy she'd done it. But first. So, 4 people with little in common except a desire to play a part in a more sustainable future, until they suddenly had something else in common. One day, Duncan was holding a community meeting at Chipping Norton Town Hall, an Oxfordshire market town, population 5,800. Everything seemed normal, except it was a full house, 150 people, which was unusual, but Duncan felt gratifying for a Wednesday afternoon.
Oh, we probably talked about things like the leisure centre in Chipping Norton, which needs a new roof, and it's getting one, that kind of thing.
But then,
halfway through the meeting, several people stood up and started shouting, and there was a real hubbub. And they were talking about the Great Reset. I'd never heard of it before that point.
It was strange and alarming. Duncan was being shouted at by people calling his traffic filter scheme part of a plot to lock them in their homes. A plot they called the Great Reset.
They were talking about this Klaus Schwab, never heard of him. They talked about the World Economic Forum. I have heard of that, but I thought it was this meeting of business leaders and government leaders in Davos. That's the only time I'd come across it. And they were saying, you want to stop us going more than 15 minutes from our homes. At that point, the leader said, okay, I think we probably all have a cup of tea, so we'll just have a bit of a recess for a moment.
It wasn't only Duncan getting accused of conspiring in this thing he had never heard of, the Great Reset. There was James in San Francisco.
So everything was fine. We were operating for a year to little fanfare. The house was 100% occupied. And one day the news ran with the story about people sleeping in pods in Palo Alto. But it just started to go really viral to a weird extent. For us, we were wondering, well, it's interesting, but it's not that interesting. Why is it spreading like this? And so we looked on Twitter and saw the majority of the noise was essentially implying that we were forcing people into these pods, which we thought was strange.
James Googled and found conspiracy sites about his pod company that spiraled into all kinds of directions.
Going into the Great Reset and the WEF, they had somehow connected that to pods and bugs and forcing people to live in pods, and then I thought, okay, so now that's probably what's behind this.
So why was this happening? Why were James and Duncan and, as we'll see, Ida and Joseph the insect chef all getting bombarded with similarly bewildering accusations that they were foot soldiers in a plot called the Great Reset? To answer that, let me take you to a mountaintop in the French Alps in early March 2020, a week before lockdown.
I'm Thierry Marais. I'm an entrepreneur based in Chavagneux, which is a mountain resort in the French Alps, and I have several businesses.
For a number of years, Thierry ran the World Economic Forum's Davos conference, bringing together politicians like Ida with corporate giants like BP and Pfizer for talks and backroom meetings intended to, quote, improve the state of the world. He produces a newsletter about macroeconomics called the Monthly Barometer that gets sent to 3,000 decision makers and private investors around the world. And he has another business,
which consists in going to the mountains to learn from the high mountains lessons that can be applied to the world of decision making in business and investment terms.
How does that work? What is it about the mountains that can work in that way?
Well, in the mountain, you learn how to make decisions very fast, and hopefully good decisions, because otherwise you're in trouble. You have to trust the people who are on your rope. It's much, much better to think when you are in nature.
Terry was climbing a mountain one day in early March 2020, a week before lockdown, when his phone rang.
I was ski touring. I was on my way up the mountains with my wife, his friend, and I got a phone from Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab being the founder of the World Economic Forum, where Thierry had worked for some years. They discussed how the pandemic was looming towards them and what that might mean.
I studied a bit of history, and I knew that every time a pandemic occurs, it's a momentous event. Things are going to change in many different ways, radically.
Thierry means like how, after the Black Death in the 1300s, the surviving workers realised they could demand shorter hours and higher pay, and so feudalism began to crumble.
So I thought, like all pandemics, such a momentous event can play a key role in creating conditions for new policies. And I thought, surely this is an opportunity to write a book about what might be coming after the pandemic.
So you needed a title?
So of course we needed a title, yeah.
So what did you come up with?
Well, we come up with a Great Reset.
Was that your title?
Absolutely, I had it in my mind from the outset. It's punchy, it means exactly what it says. People understand it because of this IT metaphor that you use when you have to reset a computer. And I thought it would work well.
Do you remember where you were when you thought that's the perfect title?
I'm sure I was at the mountains because I tend to work while walking.
Their book about how the pandemic could lead us to a, quote, better form of capitalism and a fairer, healthier planet was launched in a grand way with testimonials by the then Prince Charles.
We have an incredible opportunity to create entirely new sustainable investing in nature as the true engine of our economy.
Klaus Schwab himself.
We are at a turning point of humankind.
And then there was Grover from Sesame Street, making a guest appearance on the World Economic Forum's Great Reset podcast.
Hello, everybody. It is I, your cute and adorable pal Grover. You are in luck because I know a thing or two about resetting. I reset my alarm clock every morning. But you are talking about resetting the entire world. That is a very big job.
How long did it take you to bring the book out?
Very fast, 3 months.
Wow.
Not even.
Oh my God, it can take me that amount of time to write a paragraph.
It's funny you're saying that because, so it took us 3 months, which was a collaboration, of course, between Klaus and myself. And when the first conspiracy theories emerged, they were based on the wrong observation that it's impossible to write a book in 3 months.
Oh, were people saying that you engineered that?
Exactly. The book had been prepared well in advance for the time when it could be created by this cabal of elite people.
Because after the successful launch, things turned bad, fast. On the left, writers like Naomi Klein attacked the Great Reset as a PR smokescreen, a place where, quote, heads of transnational oil giants opine about the urgent need to tackle climate change. On the conspiratorial right, the criticisms were more baroque, despite, or in part because, of Sesame Street's Grover, that grabbed hold of the Great Reset and wouldn't let go.
They've actually infiltrated themselves in Sesame Street. They're going after kids. They want kids to know this phrase, the Great Reset, because it means woke ideology.
To many, this sounds like something straight out of George Orwell's 1984, but I believe an even better guidepost would be the Book of Revelation and the coming Antichrist-led system.
When did you first realize that some people saw the title, The Great Reset, as sinister rather than optimistic?
I got a phone call from a friend in the United States who told me, oh, you are on Fox News. And in the morning I looked at Amazon and saw that the book, which was doing reasonably well, was doing fantastically well. I think we became #1 instantly in the US.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of this crazy conspiracy around the book.
People were hate buying it.
Absolutely. That was my assumption.
I guess hate buying is still buying, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
Nobody eats bugs voluntarily. They're filthy. People need to be persuaded to give up meat, and if necessary, forced.
This is Tucker Carlson's Fox documentary about the Great Reset called Let Them Eat Bugs.
We know what you're feeling. Repulsion, right?
There was nothing in Thierry's book about bug eating, but the World Economic Forum had published an article about how by 2050 we'll need to feed 2 billion more people with only 4% of arable land remaining, and maybe edible insects are the answer. Joseph, the edible insect chef, appears in the documentary, although he now believes...
The documentary is a hit piece. It is a hit piece on the World Economic Forum. It's a hit piece on edible insects. It kind of just unravels, in my opinion.
Many believe that Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum is the globe's biggest bug pusher. Replacing beef with crickets appears to be the end stage of the Great Reset, the part where they take control even of the food you eat.
The Great Reset had become an obsession on the right. Practically every talk show host was taking the lead from one another, all of them scouring the World Economic Forum's website for essays that might sound terrifying with the right spin. Here's Osama bin Laden's niece, Noor, a beloved figure on the conspiratorial right, on Steve Bannon's show, The War Room.
I don't want to eat the bugs. I don't want to live in the pod. I don't want to be trapped in a digital jail, and nothing they can do will make me.
And here's Alex Jones, speculating wildly about a World Economic Forum essay extolling a future world where everything we need could be found within 15 minutes of our homes.
You get to leave your 15-minute city 100 times a year in Oxford. But after that, you get penalized on your social credit score. They're really prison cities. It's put out by the Davos Group. Not just saying you'll own nothing and like it. They explain this will save the Earth. This bizarre tyranny.
Hence Duncan being yelled at Chipping Norton Town Hall. The protesters had somehow connected his bus lane proposals to the 15-minute city idea, even though the two things had nothing to do with one another.
It's weird that something as mundane and rather dull as traffic management should be dragged into this.
But dragged in it was. Thousands of protesters held a march through Oxford. Some of them held up wanted placards with Duncan's face on them. They'd been influenced by many thought leaders on the right, all of them echoing one another's accusations about Duncan and his plans. These were hugely successful podcasters and writers like Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson.
I hadn't really come across Jordan Peterson before this whole episode, and yet I understand that he was one of the things that sort of brought me to attention.
Jordan Peterson had posted Duncan's traffic proposal on Twitter, calling him and his colleagues idiot tyrannical bureaucrats. Make no mistake, he wrote in a tweet, viewed 7.5 million times. It's part of a well-documented plan. Death threats started pouring in. To Duncan.
I had one from somebody I don't know at all that said, "Your time will come, sunshine."
And to James in San Francisco.
So the way that our website works is you apply to live in the house. We ask for their job, and their job that they put was killing hipster scum like you.
But that was nothing compared to what Ida from the Danish Parliament was going through. If you recall, Ida wrote a thought experiment essay for the World Economic Forum's website, imagining a city in 2030 where products have